Hello, this is Bob Wells here, and welcome to another episode of the Undercurrent Stories podcast. We're in the Georgian market town of Stamford, and we're actually celebrating a 6-year gap between another podcast we did with my guest, who I'll tell you about in a minute. We're going to be looking at some of the various characters and buildings in Stamford. Stamford is about 100 miles north of London, 100 miles south of York, an old Georgian market town, famous for its sheep, and a very famous pub called the George Inn, which is a notorious pub. And I'm really pleased to welcome back a personal friend, a historian, and somebody who knows an awful lot about the town. His name is Bill Cunningham. Hello, Bill. Nice to have you back.
Good morning. Welcome to you all.
Now, Bill, I know that you did this when you last came on the podcast back 6 years ago, in that COVID year.
But a week before COVID, if I recall.
It was, yeah. Perhaps you'd like to just tell everybody a bit about yourself and how you became interested in history, and particularly in Stamford.
Yes, I retired a few years ago, and I've always had a great love of history and art, and I started to become a guide at a local stately home, and also I trained up to be a town guide of Stamford. I live close to Stamford. It's an amazing town, I beg your pardon, and it's absolutely fabulous history. It's got so much that you can learn from. And there's an enormous stately home here called Burghley House, one of the treasure houses of England. And during the summer months, I work there as a guide, taking people around, which is a great privilege and is extremely enjoyable.
Thanks, Bill, for telling us a bit about yourself. Now, we're just heading south out of the little central part of Stamford, just gone past the George pub. I think we'll probably get a coffee there later, Bill.
You're dead right.
Be quite nice. Or maybe something stronger, depends what time we finish. Now, we're just crossing a road here, Burghley Lane. Burghley House. Tell us about Burghley House, Bill.
Burghley House is the ancestral homeland of the Cecil family. If you're Tudor history fans, you may be aware of a chap called William Cecil. He is the Lord Treasurer for Queen Elizabeth I of England, a very great man indeed, the most important person in the kingdom after the Queen. He served her for virtually all her reign. He was a local man from Stamford, not from a very rich family, but at the time he's done about 40 years working as a top man in England, he was a very wealthy man. And William Cecil set up a house here called Burghley House in his hometown. It's a massive structure, and it's what we call a Tudor or Elizabethan prodigy house, fit to accommodate a queen. And the Cecil family are still here, and the house is still in a trust now, but it's got family members running it, and it's a great place to visit. They own a lot of the town over the years, and have had a big impact on the town itself. The title the family have is the Marquises of Exeter. Nothing to do with Exeter, the town in England, about 300 miles away. It's just a title that King James granted to one of the Lord Burghleys. And sometimes when I talk about the Cecils, I might call them the Exeters, I might call them the Cecils, but they are essentially the same people. And Stamford itself, just off the main Great North Road. In fact, at the moment, Bob and I are walking along what is the Great North Road, or was the Great North Road. The town's been bypassed by now, and it's a main road that ran from London to York. Then after the King of Scots became King of England, it ran up to Edinburgh as well. It's a key communications line. And the road through Stamford itself was designed to be able to accommodate 16 mounted armed men riding abreast through the town. I've not checked that out though, I must say. So that's a brief intro to Stamford. We'll touch on a few more things as we go along.
I thought it was quite apt there, Bill, to see the sign "Do Come Again," which is sort of sums up Stamford in many ways. I know it's been voted, certainly in the Sunday Times, one of the best places to live in Britain, and both of us live quite near, and we would probably agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fine place. It's not a city. It's got lots of old buildings, lots of nice restaurants, lots of small independent shops. and an amazing market on a Friday, which is slightly over 1,000 years old, the market. Come on a Friday and you can shop in the traditional way. And yes, it's just very old English, shall we say. So here we are. We're coming up to a rather grand edifice now. I'll let Bob do a quick introduction on it.
So we're coming up to an entrance which I know as the Bottle Lodges. Now, Bill, tell us all about the Bottle Lodges.
Well, this is a very grand entrance to Burghley House. Sadly, it's not used now unless you are the king coming through here. It was built in 1801. The house itself was built in the 1500s. And they're quite splendid, look very grand. And it's built in 1801 by a chap called Henry Cecil. He was the 10th Earl of Exeter, and in 1801 he was promoted to be a Marquess. He became the Marquess of Exeter. The reason for that was he was a big supporter of the then Tory party, and as a reward for that support he was made a Marquess. A Marquess is one rank above an Earl. So when you have English aristocrats, the top rank is a Duke, then below them you have a Marquess, below that an Earl, below that a Viscount and a Baronet. So he got a promotion and he built these splendid lodges in an Elizabethan fashion, looking very, very grand indeed, and to match Burghley House itself. Now, Henry Cecil's an interesting man, and he has quite an interesting story, because I like people and I like talking about people rather than just historical facts. Henry Cecil, his first wife was called Emma Vernon. She was a very rich heiress, and after 10 years of marriage, Emma ran off with the local vicar, the curate, and they disappeared off. Now, I don't blame her for doing that. He had gambled and drank away her entire fortune, so I don't blame her. So off she went, and somewhat humiliated, because he wasn't yet the Earl at the time, somewhat humiliated, he went off to Shropshire under the name of John Jones, and he pretended to be an artist, and he stayed on a farm. And as luck would have it, the farm had a beautiful 16-year-old daughter called Sarah. Sarah Hoggins was her name. And Henry fell in love with her. And he married her. Unfortunately, he had forgotten to divorce his first wife, which is easily done in these situations. And so eventually, rather than being sent off to Botany Bay as a bigamist, being an influential aristocrat, he actually managed to get an Act of Parliament, which is the only way to get a divorce in those days. And he got divorced properly. He married Sarah, and she became his second wife. She came to Burghley, and she was known as the Cottage Countess because, unlike every other marriage of the Cecils, she was from more common stock, and she was the Cottage Countess from humble origins. Rumour had it that she struggled to settle into society here. She produced 4 children and sadly died aged 23 on the giving birth to her 4th child. So it wasn't a happy time, but it's quite interesting. Although, of course, being an Earl or about to become an Earl, you can obviously get yourself a nice Act of Parliament to get a divorce. And though in actual fact, now I have seen the actual marriage certificate, he did marry Sarah under the name of John Jones, which I suppose really should have put him on the boat to Botany Bay. But there we go. That's what privilege can do for you.
I love the human stories, Bill, that you tell. It's sort of things haven't really changed very much, so it's good to hear that. So we're now overlooking the famous George Hotel. And Bill, I mean, I've been here many times. Tell us all about the George Hotel.
I'm quite impressed that you come here many times, given the prices they charge in the George. It's a bit of an institution in Stamford and possibly parts of England as well. It's a very old-fashioned coaching inn. Stamford's on the Great North Road, as I mentioned earlier, and therefore the coach traffic up and down was quite intense. And the George, which you're looking at now, is a splendid building, not named after King George's. It's way older than that. It's named after St George. In fact, it goes back even further than that. So it goes back to the Norman Conquest, or indeed even before. We're just south of the river, so just outside the old traditional Stamford. And the George goes back over 1,000 years, and it's been looking after the coach trade for that time. Now, of course, no coaches, but it's full of tourists and people coming into the town. It's got a fascinating history. Lots of things have happened here. They've had their share of murders. There was a murder committed by a soldier de Groon who killed the publican here back in 1740. 1814 after a Jacobite riot. There's also a lovely amusing story about 1839. One of the ostlers here, a chap called Phillips, he put a halter on round his wife's neck, walked her through the town, up to the market, and by the old pillory and whipping post, he stood her on a box and put her up for sale. And she was purchased by a bricklayer from Oakham. I believe she fetched the fine figure of 4 shillings, and that included children. And that's 1839. Oddly enough, that's the last time we had a wife sale in Stamford. Prior to that, we did have a few of those. It's interesting, of course, back in those days, the only way to get a divorce was by Act of Parliament. Hence, our friend Henry Cecil, a wealthy aristocrat, could get that. But it was common knowledge among poor people. They thought that you could actually have a legal divorce if you sold the wife. So generally what normally was the case, there'd be an unhappy marriage, the wife had seen somebody else, and of course she says, look, I want to marry him, so let's set up a wife sale. They have a wife sale, and the common people thought that was a proper divorce. Maybe not always an unhappy ending for these situations. But splendid building, and when you come down the Great North Road into Stamford, you'll see a huge, great big sign with the George on it. It crosses over the road and reaches to the buildings on the other side, linking the two together. And that's what we call a gibbet sign. Highwaymen operated around here, including Dick Turpin, and the idea was you could hang them from the sign gibbet as it crossed on the other side of the road. Well, I'm sad to say that's what we told tourists, but in actual fact, the main function of this great, big, huge sign, which is a girder that runs across the road to the other buildings, it's been up there for several hundred years. It's actually to stop the front of the George falling into the street, but I like to call it a gibbet sign all the same. It sounds a lot better. And also behind me, we've got some buildings built by chap William Cecil, our friend, and built in 1596, and they are almshouses. Almshouse is an old English word for poor houses, and Stamford has 4 functioning almshouses in the town. The oldest is about 1475, and this one's 1596. Still used and accommodates, I believe, about 13 people actually stay and live here, so it's very, very nice overlooking the river. And for a modest rent, I'm sure that would suit me fine in a few years' time.
Just going back to the George, I'm always amazed whenever I tell people, I could be anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world, and I'm always amazed when you say from Stamford, the people will say something like, oh, the George. They suddenly remember the George at Stamford. It's an incredible meeting place.
It is. It's and say we'll probably pop in there afterwards and have a nice cup of coffee or a quick snifter. It's very old-fashioned. You go in there, you got oak beams, you got big fires, and it's got huge history. I mean, in the cellars, they've got medieval cellars. The actual George at one time was owned by the Cecil family for centuries. In fact, William Cecil's grandfather used to be the publican of it, so it shows he wasn't from a very great and famous family. But it's very much like an institution. It's been through good times and bad times, and now it's on its way up again. The George itself, for centuries, as I say, was owned by the Cecil family. And I mentioned about Henry Cecil being made a Marquess because of his great support of the Tory party. That was the more right-wing party of the times. And this was the headquarters of the Tory party. The Cecils controlled the 2 MPs in the town. Stamford are a very corrupt and rotten borough. And the actual George did quite well out of elections because the Cecils and the Earls of Exeter would have all their supporters brought here prior to elections. So in 1734, which is a very hotly contested and frankly quite violent election, he spent £434 in the George plying the voters with drink. And £434 in 1734 was worth a lot of money. That was an awful lot of drink. Yep. And on top of that, he had to bung them a flat bribe, roughly about 2 guineas per voter, to actually vote the right way. And I think also the threat of eviction as well helped to focus people's mind on which party to vote for.
So we're now just going down what's known as St Mary's Passage, straight from the main road, the very old alley, past various businesses. We got Adnams there. So we're coming down now to the River Welland, and We're going to a place which is known as the Meadows. Bill's going to tell us all about it.
Yes, well, the Meadows is like the heart and lungs of Stamford. It can be very lively in the summer with youths and people gathering to have a good time. The river's here, and we're lucky to be standing on the path on the Meadows. I expected it to be flooded. As the clue is in the name, it's called the Meadows, and we've had a lot of rain. To my left, there's a street called Bath Row. It's just where the castle used to stand, and there's a building there, an old building with a great big sign on it saying Baths. Back in 1724, Stamford doctors had this strange notion that if you kept clean, it was actually quite good for you. They built a bath house, put a big bath in it, charged £1 initially on Monday, and the price gradually went down in what you paid to get a bath as the water got a little bit dirtier. I believe Friday was Ladies' Day. But there's one thing about the Meadows it's quite important. I'll introduce a bit of a tale about Stamford. You may have heard of Pamplona in Spain, where you have bull running and people throw tomatoes at bulls. Well, the Spaniards copied it off us, because Stamford was Britain's premier bull running and bull baiting town. And the tradition goes back centuries into the dim, distant past. And it was the last town in England to have bull runs, and they were massive in the town. And strange enough, a lot of people in Stamford don't realise this. There's a few stories about how it started, but my favourite is the one where back in the medieval days, early medieval times, William de Warenne, who was the constable of William the Conqueror's castle here at Stamford, which is just to my left, and he was looking out the window, and on the Meadows field below he could see some butchers chasing a bull, trying to capture it, and they're having trouble. So he thought he'd help them out, and he goes and jumps on his horse, rides down, and they chase the bull all the way around the town. They eventually capture it and slaughter it. And he thought, well, this is good fun. And so he said to the butchers, look, I'll let you graze your cattle here all year round, provided that on the 13th of November, St. Bride's Day, which is a day to commemorate a massacre of the Danes which occurred in the town, that you supply to the town at least one bull for the sport and amusement of the townsmen. So thereafter, on the 13th of November, every year, Stamford have a bull run. It was controlled by the people called the Bullards. Now, this is a working class sport. Very much for the common people. The gentry in Stamford had their arts theatres and their assembly rooms, and the poor people had their bull run. And the Bullards would, what they do, the town would be closed up, the town gates would be shut, the shops boarded up and the beer brought in, and the Bullards would be men and women. They'd run the show. You'd have a bull empress, often the most successful prostitute in the town, and you had great names. One was called Nan Roberts, a large, formidable lady with a stick, and Anne Blade, so they're quite formidable. They'd have a song prior to the event saying, on this day in Stamford there are no kings or queens, we're all kings in our own right, and you can be guilty of no crime other than the murder of your own species. So it just sets tone of the actual event. It's going to be wild. And the bull would be brought into the town, led down, and it would lead down towards Bath Row, where I am now, right by the mill race. And there it would be taunted by the crowd, and they'd chase it around the town. Sometimes they'd capture it on the town bridge and throw it off the bridge into the river, and then obviously slaughter it and have a great big party which lasted for a long time. It was a massive event. It was very wild. I would imagine the gentry and the middle classes would have left the town when this occurred. Stamford was a hot pot. The people compressed within the old town walls, and the Cecil family ruled it fairly firmly. And
when did the bull run finish?
That's right. Let's come to that. Bull runs were banned by the government in the 18th century. However, Stamford continued their bull run. It kept going on and on and on. And it got into the 1800s, and the government was much more firm about suppressing this somewhat riotous event. And so they brought in 200 Metropolitan policemen in the 1830s to try and stop the event. So here you are, you've got about 5,000 people ready for a party and a good time, and a couple hundred policemen. No, that bull run was not going to be stopped. A year later, they brought in the policemen and soldiers. All that happened was, the soldiers came in, saw what was happening, thought this would be good fun. They got drunk and chased the bull around town. And that event went on for some years until 1839. With all the pressure, we had the last bull run in Stamford. The bull was led in by the bull-eyed empress, and at the end of the event and the race, the bull-eyed empress burnt her ceremonial clothing and became a Methodist, and the entire bull run ceased. And that was the last time we had a bull run in Stamford. If that hadn't happened, we'd be a bit like Pamplona, but without the sunshine and the tomatoes.
Bill, was it the only bull run in the country?
No, there were several. The one that preceded it, at Tetbury, and that ran till about 1780. But it was the biggest by a country mile, and it was hotly contested. But it is, very much for the working people here. Rather savage, obviously.
And are there any relics that we have in Stamford showing that there was a bull run in?
There's a couple of paintings. There's one good one in the town hall showing a bull chasing after some men, women and children in Broad Street in Stamford. And there's a large, formidable-looking lady called Nan Roberts, and she was stood there with a big stick watching it all going on. That's roughly about it, but there's nothing really been left. We can't really, because there's no buildings or places. The bulls are kept in the rougher working class parts of the town, in the certain pubs in the town, and they were kept there and brought out ready for the occasion. Often these pubs had a bit of a sideline in prostitution as well. This is a lovely looking old English town, but for many years this is prone to rioting and riotous affairs.
So Bill, we're now at what's known as the Stamford Hotel. Now the Stamford Hotel is fairly new to me. If somebody said to me, what is the Stamford Hotel or where is it, I would think it was the George. And I wouldn't have thought many people in Stamford will have heard of it originally. But tell us all about the Stamford Hotel, Bill.
Well, here we are. We're in St Mary's Place, named after that splendid early medieval church in front of me. A very fine church, one of the 5 main surviving churches in the town. And to the right of the church, just behind it, in fact, is this massive building, a huge, great building, a Regency building, built about 1812. Huge building, great big Corinthian columns on the front, and at the very, very top of it, quite high up, there's a statue of Justice, a lady who's representing justice. Splendid building. Sadly, though, it's way, way too big for the street. It's on a small, narrow medieval street, one of the southern boundaries of the old town, way overpowering, completely too large for both the town and for the street. And it's meant to be large and overpowering because it's built as a political statement. The building was built by a chap called Gerard Knoll from the Knoll family. They were the Earls of Gainsborough. They lived about 10 miles away from here in Exton. And Gerard Knoll, he constructed this great big building to be the headquarters of the Whig Party. Back in those days, Stamford was what was known as a rotten borough. The town had 2 MPs that returned to Parliament, and probably a population of about 3,000 or 4,000, and an electorate of maybe 400 people, 400 men, that is. And whereas in other towns in industrial Britain, like Liverpool or Manchester, maybe a population of 500,000, they returned no MPs at all. So Stamford was a rotten borough, going back some time. It's also a pocket borough. By that it meant the 2 MPs were in the pocket of the local aristocrat, namely the family over at Burghley House. It was known for a lot of corruption, political corruption. And the house, this great big building, was built by Gerard Knoll on the top of the hill here, overlooking the river valley. And it was headquarters of the Whig Party. And he put it here and built it here because the George Hotel was the headquarters of the Tory party, who were controlled by the then Cecil family. Now, in those days, in the early 1800s and 1700s, you had 2 political parties in Britain. You had the Tory party. They were the party of the aristocrats, the big landowners, the rich industrialists and the bishops. And you had the Whig Party. They were the party of the big landlords, the big aristocrats, the big industrialists, but without the bishops. And Stamford was largely a Tory town and had been for many, many years. And he built this building ready for the 1812 election, and he wanted to wrest control of the town. What did happen about 2 weeks before the election, the land agent for the Burghley Park put notices round the town saying, if anyone voted for against the Cecil candidates, they'd be evicted, which is quite a strong warning, really, is because basically the estate owned most of the town, and so that was quite a warning. And in those days there was no secret ballot. Elections were published, who voted for what, take about 2 or 3 days, and you could tell who voted for who. So with all that intimidation, guess what happened? The Tory candidate won the election.
There's nothing like a bit of democracy, is there,
Absolutely, it's the way it should be. Let's bring it back. Let's have a property threshold before somebody gets a vote. So that's what happened, and it was bad news for Gerard Knoll, because his house at Exton burnt down not long after the election. His business nearly went bust. And he'd also spent a fortune building this splendid building, £46,000 it cost him. He spent a lot of money on bribes for the electorate, and so it didn't work out too well. He had to sell this building for £9,000 a few months after it had been built. The good news is, though, actually, because if Noel had won the election, he was going to arrange for the splendid St Mary's Church, which is in front of the building, to be demolished, thereby giving the Tory people on the George a much better view of his splendid building with justice at the top. So luckily that didn't happen in that particular case. But Stamford was notorious for corruption. In the 1840s, a group of Russian aristocrats came to the town to learn how to run a democratic election, which is quite interesting. And they had a House of Lords inquiry into corruption in the town on politics, and oddly enough it found in favour of the then Tory candidate. So nothing changed. Now, of course, Stamford is no longer a pocket borough. We share our MP with Oakham, and I must say relations between Burghley House and the town are extremely good now, and there are large employing a lot of people, including myself, but the relations are a lot better now. Happier times.
Well, Bill, that's yet another fantastic story that you've told us, all about Stamford. It never ceases to amaze me, the amount of stories that you personally dig up from the town that we live in. And what I would also urge listeners, if you want to find out a bit more about Stamford, and I'll put this in the show notes, we did a recording about 6 years ago, just before COVID, where Bill again went round Stamford, and we were talking about various characters that live there. That's a very interesting one. Thank you for coming on the show, Bill. If we've got any listeners perhaps who want to find out a bit more about Stamford and would like to have a tour around, what would you suggest they do?
Well, if you look on the website for the Stamford Town Guides, you might be able to see reference on how to arrange a tour. And please give us a call.
My guest today has been Bill Cunningham, tour guide and local historian. You can find details to the Stamford tour guides on the show notes. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.